Chapter 3, Section 5 is about proportional and non-proportional relationships. So in this section, we're going to continue to talk about finding slope, being able to see what the relationship between the x and the y values would be on a graph. But we're going to discuss the difference between what makes a graph considered proportional versus non-proportional. A proportional relationship or a proportional function would be a direct variation graph, so that's what we were just talking about in section 4, and it goes through the origin. So all of those functions that we dealt with in section 4 that said y equals mx, those would all be considered proportional. So if they take this form, meaning that they go through the origin because that y-intercept is 0, that's going to make this a proportional graph. Now, a non-proportional graph does not go through the origin, so it would have a different y-intercept. So this would be more of the form y equals mx plus that b. Technically, yes, the proportional does have a b, but remember we talked about how that b is 0 because that's what made it become proportional. If you have a number written after the mx portion, so if it says plus 2 or minus 5, that's going to create this to become non-proportional. Well, if they give you a table, so not even looking at the graph, because looking at a graph, it would be easy to know if it was proportional or not, because we would just look to see if it goes through the origin. But sometimes we're going to give you a table, and that's not maybe feasible for us to graph it, or it's maybe just inconvenient and not the easiest route. So instead, I want to be able to take a look at those values that they're putting in the table and see if I can figure out for myself, are they proportional or not? So when I look at this equation here, I want to take kind of a look at what are the top numbers doing, what are the bottom numbers doing. So my hours up here, if I look, I'm going 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on. All of those seem to be adding 1 at a time. And down here, we're going 50 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200. So all of those are adding 50 each time. If I were to go backwards, so if I started at 150 and I were to go the opposite direction, so I were to subtract 1 and subtract 50, what point would I be back at? Hopefully you're thinking 0, 0, because 1 minus 1 would be 0 and 50 minus 50 would be 0. So there's no b in the equation. I mean, my slope would be 50 over 1, or just 50. So this equation would look like this, y equals 50x. There's no b, because if I go backwards, my b would be 0, so it does go through the origin. So this would be considered proportional. So take a look at this practice problem. Decide if you think that it's proportional or not. And if it is proportional, try to write the equation for it by finding the slope. So what I would have done here is, again, look at what your numbers are doing each time. So all of those up there are going up by 1. All of the bottom numbers are going up by 75. So that would be 75 over 1. So my slope would be 75. And then x. Now to double check to see if it's proportional, if we go backwards and we subtract 1 and we subtract 75, we're going to be back at 0, 0. So it is proportional because it would go through the origin. Now sometimes it's going to give you a graph, like this next one here. They're asking us to write an equation for the graph, and then they want us to say, is it proportional or not proportional? So for this one here, they do give us a little table for us to fill out the values. Hopefully, you guys can look at this graph and see that it does not go through 0, 0. It goes up here at 6. So this would be considered non-proportional. But what I'm going to do next here to be able to write out the equation is I'm going to look for those points so that I can find my slope and I can find my y-intercept so that I can write my equation out for this. So for this graph, I just kind of look at the points that they give me here. I see that it does go through this point on that y-intercept, or the y-axis, which is the y-intercept, and that's at 0, 6. Now A would be at 1, 9. B is at 2, 12. C is at 3, 15. And D is at 4, 18. So to find your slope, all of these numbers are increasing by 1. All of these numbers are increasing by 3. So my slope would be 3 over 1, or 3, because remember, slope is the change in the y over the change in the x. So that would be 3 over 1, or 3. So my equation here is going to be y equals 3x, but remember I said that this point here is your b, which is 6. So it'd be 3x plus 6. And again, like I said earlier, it doesn't go through the origin, so it would be considered non-proportional. So they wanted us to do two things there: write the equation and decide if it's proportional or non-proportional. Now, something that they may ask you to do is write something in function notation. And to do that, all you need to do is change the y to f of x. So that equation up there that said y equals 3x plus 6, to change it to function notation, you would switch y with that f parentheses x, and then say that that's equal to 3x plus 6. And that's all you have to do when they ask you to rewrite it in function notation. You won't see that a whole lot, but sometimes in equations they will even use like f of x, and so you might want to just know that those mean the same thing. F of x and y are talking about the same situation. It's just a different way of notating that. So on the back side here of this page, I want you guys to look at this equation. I want you to create an equation for this graph and then decide if it's proportional or not proportional. So what I did first is found my slope. I picked 2 points here. Now A is at 1, 5. D is at 3, 10. B is at 5, 15. It doesn't matter what 2 points you picked. I just grabbed D and A. So on the top I did 10 minus 5. And on the bottom I did 3 minus 1. And so that simplified to 5 over 2. So that's your slope. Now you need to see, like, where does it cross the y-axis at, which is at this point right there, because that would be your B. And I'm roughly estimating that to be at about 2.5, because it looks like it's right in between 2 and 3. So to write my equation in that slope-intercept form, we would do y equals 5 over 2x, and then plus that b, plus 2.5. Now, because it doesn't go through the origin, I would say that this one is non-proportional.